Good afternoon or good evening if you're watching from Europe. Welcome to the most recent edition of the Scott Ritter Show. A lot has been happening. I think one of the most interesting things that's happened recently is the surprise visit of Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Russian Defense Minister Shoigu, and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Foreign Minister, all three arriving in roughly the same time in the Belarusian capital of Minsk, where they underwent intense dialogue with their counterparts. This leads to question: why this kind of meeting, this level of meeting, and why now? I don't think there's anybody better to help us answer this question than today's guest, Mr. Vadim Gigin, a noted Belarusian historian and political commentator. Thank you very much for agreeing to come on the show today. And let me start by asking you this first question. There's been a lot of talk about the status of the union state between Russia and Belarus. The union state has gone through various starts and stops over time. But recently, in the aftermath of the Russian initiation of a special military operation against Ukraine, it has been put on the fast track. Was this meeting in Minsk simply the consolidation, the finalization of the union state between Russia and Belarus?
Yes, good evening, Scott. Good morning. I'm really glad to hear you, to see you. And Belarus, as many other countries, is following your evaluations of the political and military situations. You're one of the most quoted specialists, military analysts in Belarus. So once again, thank you very much that you spent time and made focus on the situation around our country. As for the visit of Vladimir Putin, the history is really interesting there. On one hand, this meeting was announced, it was expected, and they normally meet in the end of the year. This is already a tradition. But Vladimir Putin hasn't been in Belarus for 3 years. He doesn't travel a lot in the recent time. And neither he also didn't visit Mr. Xi Jinping. But both leaders, Mr. Putin and Mr. Lukashenko, they were holding this intrigue intentively, deliberately. They wanted to delude a little bit their enemies, their counterparties, because in the current situation, one of the most important points is to keep the strategic initiative. And I think that you, as the military expert, would also agree that it is good, always good, when the enemy doesn't know the plans. And the visit of Sergei Shoigu and his repeated visit together with President Putin made an impression for many that we are now on the edge of starting another campaign against Ukraine from the territory of Belarus. But many experts understood that this is not like that. Today we can say quite sure that in autumn, in September and October, there was a deliberate propaganda campaign to delude our enemies, our potential enemies in the West and in the South, when they claimed the deployment of the regional troops, Russian, Belarusian troops. But it all boiled down to just trainings on Belarusian yards with the involvement of Russian troops. Economics was the main issue on the agenda. Apart from Sergei Shoigu and Sergei Lavrov, there was the whole detachment of Russian ministers, vice prime ministers, who are supervising integration projects. I have to agree with you that in 2022 and in 2020, after the attempt of the overturn in Belarus, our integration process has been accelerated, and it has become more intensive. And if we speak briefly, I like to make a short review why this union state appeared. The fact is that Belarusian Socialist Republic, was called the most socialist republic. There were very authoritative Soviet leaders in Belarus with huge experience, with huge military guerrilla experience. They had contacts and parallels with Broz Tito. In our country, there was Mr. Mazarov, Mr. Bashirov. They were very authoritative and very well known, and they brought up a big team of Russian leaders. There were no conditions in Belarus neither for perestroika nor for the collapse of the country. And this feeling of loss, the loss of a big country, was one of the preconditions of election in 1994 of Alexander Lukashenko as Belarusian president. In 1995, the newly elected president carried out a referendum, and the majority of population supported integration with Russia, and a Russian language have become the state language, and our anthem and all other symbols of the state, they were kept, and they were directly related to the Soviet symbols. And Alexander Lukashenko was subjected to criticism from liberals, from oligarchs. In 1990s, there was a serious chase on the Russian federal channels, especially NTV channel participated in this campaign. But in the crisis time, in the late 90s, the Soviet treaty was signed, implying the creation of a union state. When Vladimir Putin came to power, and we don't have to conceal that both leaders tried to adjust to each other, they tried to withstand the sanction pressure, and Russia has been under sanctions since September 1997. We celebrated 25 years this year of all those sanctions, and it has become evident that this union state is absolutely critical and important among the current conditions. Some liberals demanded from President Putin to get away from Lukashenko. President Putin, on the contrary, provided support. And in 2022, Belarus responded equally, supporting this special military operation. And this is one of the biggest failures. We have to support this and highlight this. This is one of the biggest failures of the American policy in Europe, and one of the biggest failure of the whole Western policy, because the key goal is isolation of Russia, and here Belarus is of a critical importance. And classic Mackinder said that the key to the heartland of Russia, to this deep state, lies between Baltics and the Black Sea. And in this regard, Belarus is the most convenient platform for this strike. I have to remind that in 1941, the main strike was made towards Moscow within Barbarossa plan, and Lukashenko with support of the majority of population, is one of the supporter of Russia. And if a mistake was done and Russia would have taken another position in 2020, the war would have started earlier on the territory of Belarus. But it didn't happen, and now we see how fast the integration process goes. We have approved in 2021 28 union programs, and they are under implementation. And the implementation is going on. There will be the single customs industrial policy, taxation policy. On top of that, this year we approved, which is very important, 12 import substitution program for 105 billion Russian rubles. These are projects in IT, in industry, agriculture. Belarus is a very high industrially developed country. We produce more tractors than Russian Federation, and Belarusian logistics, Belarusian industrial enterprises, they are of critical importance for Russia. I have to say that military cooperation is going even faster than stipulated in the documents. Many Belarusian enterprises work in 3 shifts for Russian orders. I had talks with Belarusian generals. The integration and interaction with Russian colleagues is very intense. The last new examples and new samples of NATO equipment captured in the field is studied, and we share our experience with Russian colleagues. The meeting of 2 presidents confirmed that Belarus has Iskander systems in stock, and the Belarusian pilots have been retrained for piloting planes with specific missiles. In Belarus, we have other complexes, other systems which Russia doesn't have. Around division of anti-aircraft complexes, they are based on the Chinese missile, and they can hit and up to 300 kilometers in the territory of the enemy. Belarusian army, on the level of its armament, is one of the most strong, the most powerful army in Europe. And as both presidents noted, in the conditions of NATO aggressive infrastructure close to our borders, we can't go without this integration and cooperation. A few words on what kind of infrastructure is that. Many people start deluding people, stating that everything started only on the 24th of February, but this is not true. Poland claimed their plans to improve their armed forces long ago. They purchased tanks from Germany. They approved 250 Abrams tanks for the amount of $620 billion. The NATO infrastructure starts just 15 kilometers away from our border on the territory of Lithuania. There were no camps. The so-called Baltic Air Mission of NATO deployed there with planes from different countries. In Latvia, there is a so-called multinational division North under the supervision of Denmark. This is only part of projects and events planned long before the military operation. And Ukraine, back in 2021, approved the military budget in the amount of not less than 5% GDP on the annual basis. Poland has the same level now. Poland's armed forces have 163,000 troops, and they plan to bring it up to 350,000. Very soon, the new Poland division will be deployed close to Belarusian borders, and a couple of territorial defense troops. These are just a couple of facts without mentioning a lot of war trainings and war gamblings just close to our borders. A lot of troops were standing close to our borders, threatening our security, without saying about the intelligence activity. Intelligence centers are funded from the other countries. They are located in Poland, in Kiev. The anti-state military troops, Azov, have been built since 2014, and the first Ukrainian Nazi came to overthrow Lukashenko back in 1996. Just think about it, 1996. First Ukrainian militants and fighters took part in massive upheavals and riots in Belarus. This is a very long history. To understand the logic, you should know this history.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think that was extraordinarily valuable. I learned a lot as well. When we talk about what's going on right now from a military perspective, I think it's safe to say that Belarusian President Lukashenko has not been volunteering the Belarusian armed forces for service in Ukraine. From the very beginning of the special military operation, he indicated that it was not the responsibility of Belarus to participate in this conflict, that Belarus's role was to serve as a shield, protecting Russia's flank and Russia's rear from any NATO adventurism that might occur because of this. He's also mentioned that one possible scenario that could lead to Belarusian forces being involved in Ukraine would be an effort undertaken by Poland to take control of Western Ukraine, that this would be an unacceptable event from the Belarusian standpoint that could prompt Belarusian deployment. As we speak right now, although, yes, there is a NATO buildup, there is no threat of an imminent NATO attack against Belarus. As we speak, although the Polish have talked about their desire for Western Ukraine, there is no imminent invasion of Western Ukraine from Poland. But as we speak, there is talk of a joint Russian-Belarus military strike from Belarus territory towards Kiev. How did we get to this point? What has changed that has allowed Lukashenko to even consider using Belarus forces in conjunction with Russian forces to strike at the Ukrainian capital? Or is this just yet another example of the West trying to create a scenario that isn't matched by reality?
First, on the Western position, regarding those hysteria which happened before President Putin's visit to Minsk. This is an element of psychological pressure on Belarus, on the society, in terms of escalation and war threatening. This is done absolutely deliberately. On the other hand, heating up and blowing up different scenarios, they try to provoke Belarus or Russia on their steps and responses. There's a big psychological game on the brim of the big offensive. Everyone understands that the offensive is being prepared, and everyone tries to guess from what direction it will come. President Lukashenko stressed many times the position that Belarusian armed forces defend their territory. Yes, we have 15 battalion tactical groups. They are located along the border, and the border is safe and strong. Before the special operation from the military forces of the Ukraine, two operative tactical commandments were deployed, west in Rovno, and the second is north in Chernigov. The total strength, and by the way, there was a tank brigade, in the totality of these troops, artillery and others troops were superior. All these were superior to our forces. In Belarus, we have two operative commandments. One is west, the second is northwestern. One on the Poland direction, and the second one in Lithuanian direction or Baltic direction. On the Ukrainian direction, because before 2022, we didn't have any troops at all. In Brest, only we have 38 high mobile brigade deployed, one of the active one, but this is a small troop if we compare it to the forces under the disposal of the Ukrainians. We had plans to create the Southern Operative Commandment, one a mechanic brigade, one artillery brigade, but that was in the horizon of 3 to 4 years, and we were not prepared for any offensive at all. President Lukashenko stressed clearly, don't go to our territory. We are not going to enter the territory of other states before we are being attacked. And we are very patient in this. From the moment of special operations, there were a couple of attempts from the Ukrainian territory. Tochka U missiles were launched a couple of times. There were 2 cases of unmanned flying vehicles, drones. They were all shot down, but all those cases were prevented from any result results by the anti-aircraft missiles of Belarus. Although Ukrainians continue those provocations, our border guys say that there are provocators from drunken militaries from the part of Ukraine. You know, it was done by Germans before the attack of the Soviet Union, or Japanese were doing for the whole period from 1941 to 1945. What is the purpose of these provocations? It's clear. Ukraine, as our specialists say, has a plan of a hybrid intrusion when capturing some regional center, and what is their scenario? Is the intelligence groups intrusion of these traitors, a couple of dozens, maybe a couple of hundreds of people, capturing some regional city and proclaiming there a pro-Western or pro-Ukrainian government. What is the purpose? The Ukrainians say, we don't want to open the northern front. It is done to prevent Russian troops from intruding from the other side. And this is the Ukrainian plan. So we have deployed joint troops, joint forces with the Russian Federation, and we communicated them on some channels that Belarus is not going to draw any red lines or red borders, as it was done in Russia. If, God beware, something will happen, only in this case, Belarus will use its all deadly force and fire force. Why we mentioned Polonez missile, now we have Iskanders, to make the maximum strike on the enemy with all forces, and they understand what that means. As for Poland, we should know what we have to do. This is the Kaczynski grouping, and they have also their fight inside. The electoral campaign is due next year. Their chances to win are not very high. The massive riots and protests in the streets in Poland showed that this party is not popular. Kaczynski had to leave recently the post of the Polish Prime Minister. So the stake made on chauvinism, on the mobilization of the so-called velvet electorate, it's for the pro-Westerners, because they wear some special velvet hats and outfit, they are called like that. So they're making this stake on chauvinism, on Russophobia. They have so-called phantom, the fourth Rzecz Pospolita. They want to get back this Rzecz Pospolita, this big empire, from one sea to another, and consider Belarus as their potential area of influence. You saw provocations in 2021 organized by Poland with refugees. They just rehearsed the intrusion to our territory by using not only police but also army. They set up provocations to make Belarus respond. On the checkpoints, we registered attempts of throwing grenades. You just imagine, a grenade is flying from one territory to another. With gas, they poured and they attacked the journalists, not only ours, but yours also. Tear gas was sprayed, and some water with chemicals dangerous for health. They tried to provoke Belarus, but we didn't went for those provocations, we didn't buy it. And as for our position towards Ukraine, it is dictated both by our union obligations with Russian Federation and understanding of the threat which comes from Kiev regime of Zelensky, because Zelensky behaved towards Belarus and personally towards President Lukashenko very unpleasantly. When Zelensky was elected in 2019, 2019, in all his rhetorics and behavior, initially tried to copy Lukashenko, because Lukashenko is very popular in the Ukraine, and he demonstrated harshness, speaking with the officials in the style he thought he copied Lukashenko. They had the meeting in Zhytomyr in the regional forum. It was in quite an informal atmosphere, and when difficult situation happened in the Belarus in 2020, we counted at least on a neutral position from the Ukraine. Instead of this, Zelensky regime took absolutely pro-Western position. They didn't accept results of our elections. In Kiev, in some other cities, they organized the anti-Belarusian centers. In the Ukraine, there were camps, for example, in Rovno region, to prepare militants and guerrillas to send to the Belarusian territory. Propaganda centers were set up, like Freedom Radio, Radio Svoboda was speaking from Kiev and broadcasting from Kiev and other cities. Well, and what kind of reaction Kiev regime was counting from the Belarusian side? For us, their Nazi ideology is absolutely unacceptable. All this is unacceptable for us. They are absolutely alien to us, politically, ideologically. This regime deliberately started to tear from Belarus. They refused from energy supplies, and this very important reserve supply to provide proper energy balance in the Ukraine. They wage very fierce anti-Belarusian and anti-Russian rhetorics under Zelensky's control. We see that this is the regime which is being pumped up with weapons constantly, is a danger for Belarus. At the same time, I'm not a military specialist, but as I see the situation, making a strike from Belarusian territory, this situation is not very likely. Neither Belarusian nor Russian forces. Let's see how the situation will develop. The position of our president is shared by population. They set up forced regions. They prepared fire traps in the conditions of difficult situation under Bakhmut. They still keep 9 mechanized troops on the border to Belarus. They have plan in case of crisis. They also have plans to bring in Polish troops to Volyn and Rovno regions. And the participation of Poland in this case doesn't imply the Article 5 of NATO statute, because the situation will happen not on the territory of one of the NATO member states. They dig out some trenches, and they prepared very well for potential fighting and strikes. And making strikes in this situation would be counterproductive from my point of view, although such plans probably are being considered, and only Russian military command knows about those plans.
Thank you very much for that very useful insight and explanation. I have another question resulting from this, and you alluded to it earlier. You alluded to Belarus receiving Iskander missiles, and you also talked about Belarusian pilots being trained for the employment of special munitions. And I think we know what special munitions means. It's a reference to nuclear armed weapons. This is a huge deal. It's a big deal. What do you think prompted this? Is this a Russian response to its ongoing disagreement with NATO about NATO's so-called nuclear umbrella, the US B-61 bombs that are stockpiled in Europe, the training of German, Dutch, Italian pilots to employ these weapons? Is this a Russian response to that? Is this a joint Russian-Belarus response to the expansion of NATO, the potential expansion of NATO to include Finland and Sweden? Is this a response to NATO expansion into Poland, the Baltics. What's behind this dramatic decision to turn Belarus into a nuclear-capable state, not a nuclear power by itself, but a state capable of employing nuclear weapons in time of war? What triggered this?
Look, I'm going to refer to the position of our president, which is quite clear. We're not going for any escalations on our own desire ever. We have very good memories about the World War II. We understand what is that. We do not lose our historical memory as many Western counterparties have. Of course, any any unfriendly step will have a reaction from our side. Like Stoltenberg and other politicians claim, but then they negate it. But, well, the claim was done that a nuclear weapon can be relocated from Germany to Poland. Initially, we were explained that it's going to happen because the Green Party came to power and they demanded, as part of their program, to withdraw partially American troops. But we see the real actions when the infrastructure is being prepared in Poland to place American nuclear weapons. And only after that claim, Alexander Lukashenko said that, yes, we can consider placing and locating nuclear weapons in Belarus, or direct threats to our Belarusian nuclear power plant, which we hear from Lithuania, from Kiev regime. Of course, it implies our strengthening our anti-aircraft system in this case. And so all our actions are a response to systematic expansion of NATO and coming closer to our borders with their infrastructure. We already seen what happened in the Baltics. The notorious Suwalk corridor. Probably you heard about this location. This is a myth, deliberately developed in the Western propaganda to escalate some threat from the Belarusian and Russian side. I told many times, I've spoken many times with our militaries. They have absolutely different plans in case of any conflict. There's no Suwalk corridor at all in their plans. It was done deliberately in order to pump up Poland with the Western and NATO weapons, and this topic is being discussed constantly and kept on the agenda. And yes, Belarus will do all measures to provide its security. And it is not just harsh steps which they say we will do, or at the background of special military operations. One wants to make Belarus to do something, but no one forces anybody in Belarus to do something. All initiatives in military development and strengthening in a nuclear program are initiated by the Republic of Belarus itself, and it is done within the signed treaties in the late 90s. The decision on our joint regional groupings, military groupings, was made in 1998, back in 1998, in response to the first steps to expand NATO in 1997. Let's remember when it happened. 2001, on the background of the global escalation after George Bush Jr. came to the presidency, our doctrine of Union State was adopted on the initiative of Belarus, which stipulated that the attack on Belarus is equal to the attack on Russian Federation, and we will respond with all forces, including nuclear forces, regularly. Every 2 years, we make Western war trainings. Probably now they will happen more frequently. They imply coordination. For example, the new Belarusian general or Russian general come to the office and can come to our staff and take part in the commandment. We have a very high level of mutual understanding, training of staff, integration of military technical documentation. We have unified military forces of our union state, we can say that. And it was done earlier. Alexander Lukashenko stressed that if we see the high level of threat for Belarus, tomorrow we will deploy not 20, not 30,000, but the whole Russian army will be deployed on the territory of Belarus. We can go for any measures, but I would like to warn Western analysts from the misunderstanding. Their public reports are published, and probably they underestimate our military forces. I'd like to warn them on that. And the military officials of ours say that they evaluate at the high level our systems, missile systems, especially after S-400, the special troops, our 3 legendary brigades, number 5 of the intelligence department, 38 brigade in Brest, and also our Vitebsk 103 brigade, which took part in Afghanistan. It entered Afghanistan in the first rows. These are very highly motivated and very well-trained troops. We have very high level of training among our officers, but Belarusian doctrine is peaceful. Our officers and our troops didn't take part in military conflicts. We managed all those years, and this is a huge achievement of ours, to keep peace. And in this context, we need to interact with the Russian Federation, with our ally, in order to provide not only our security, but in generally to provide peace on this territory. We see sociological surveys. I can tell you about Poland. Despite the rhetorics of their governments, the Poles, they don't want war. They are afraid of the war. And even President Duda mentioned that in their talks with prankers. We saw the reaction of the community when the Ukrainian missile flew over the border and killed 2 people. We saw how scared was the Poland society. We proceed from the understanding of public perception and public moods in these countries, in this country.
Thank you for that. I'd like to follow up with a question about Poland itself. You mentioned that the Poles were preparing to deploy troops into Western Ukraine, and that this could lead to a conflict on Ukrainian soil between Belarus and Russian forces and Polish forces. I think this is, it would be news to many people here in the West to hear something of that nature. Russia is the aggressor. Belarus is, of course, the facilitator of the aggressor, and Poland is the innocent Western nation simply trying to help the brutal victim of Russian aggression, Ukraine. But I think the reality is somewhat more complicated. Tell us a little bit, if you can, what the threat to Belarus, to Russia, to regional security is from Poland. Are the Poles a nation that only operates under the umbrella of NATO, or are the Poles capable of carrying out their own independent aggression against Belarus and Western Ukraine?
According to the analysis of the military and political situation, which was given by our defense ministry and our militaries, they carried out a number of events in autumn this year showing plans of Poland, and they show militarization of the Poland society, independent on the situation in the Ukraine. Like today, 4 divisions are deployed in Poland. They call it the tank division, they call it tank cavalry, but these are mechanized brigades. They have the flight cavalry, paratroops detachment, and they plan to deploy a couple of more brigades of territorial defense, and they bring it the number of troops, the total number of troops, to 300 or 350,000. Within this concept, Poles will be able to carry out limited operations in the Central and Eastern Europe against Belarus, for example, or in Ukraine, without specific support of other allies from NATO. In this regard, Poland is acting quite provocative, and one of the responses we saw that these preparatory actions are underway, deployment of Patriot systems on the Poland-Ukrainian borders. What is done there? They are willing to deploy these batteries in Poland, but they want Ukrainian crews working on them and providing defense for Ukrainian grounds. It could be a good target, a fair target for Russian drones, but in the Poland territory. If the threat will appear for the Kiev regime in case of the big Russian offensive, the Ukrainians will take off their troops from Volyn in Polessia and transfer them to this part of the front where Russians will attack. And Poland will cover the border, and Poland's troops will take some territories and cities in the Ukraine ground. Practically, based on the legal basis, Ukraine is like a protectorate of Poland. From May to November this year, as a result of a number of meetings, legal documents were signed and agreements were signed on special rights of Polish citizens on the Ukrainian territory. But Ukrainians don't have such rules in Poland. For example, Polish police can be in Ukraine, Polish judges can work in Ukraine, and it dramatically changes the whole military and political situation. The country, which is a locomotive of anti-Belarusian policy, asking for sanctions constantly, opening military centers, and Poland supports, and the Polish government supports so-called pospolite ruszenie, which as militia, you call militias. This is militants from immigrants. They build so-called chorugves. This is a detachment in Slovenian language, something between a company and a battalion. Why do they prepare all this? Obviously, to make actions and attempts on the territory of Belarus. They lead propaganda among Belarusian citizens of double loyalty propaganda. So-called Poland card was introduced. This is an ID, absolutely identical to passport, and this person, the person holding this ID, whole personal data will go to the Defense Ministry of Poland. For example, the Belarusian citizens can have the Belarusian citizenship and also this Polish ID. Of course, this is unfriendly act, and a very active response activities are done from our side. These people cannot hold any official positions, cannot possess weapons, and some other restrictions. The whole ideology and everything, and we have to add, Poland has the whole infrastructure to lead propaganda against Belarus, supported by the budget, television and radio stations like Belsat and others, and All this in total tells us, and they also claim that Poland has enemy goals, creating a pro-Poland regime, some separatist detachments on the Belarusian territory, and they are ready to do it. We saw it in August, September 2020, when special forces came closer to our borders. We had to reinforce around Grodno city, and in 2021 we have had crisis with refugees, and we also had to support this. Now they bring it closer to our borders. They build up a fence between Poland and Belarus. They regularly bring closer their mechanized divisions, like Division 16, to our borders. And just imagine that Poland troops will appear to the south of our borders. Just imagine, it will significantly change the whole situation in this area, and we will have to take our steps together with our Russian allies.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to follow up on that, and this will be my last question for today. We see that Russia is preparing its major offensive. We see the mobilization of 300,000 reservists. We see continued recruitment and training of significant quantities of volunteer forces. And many military experts, including myself, believe this will be a decisive offensive, one that will put the Ukrainian military at risk of destruction. With that comes the possibility of extreme political instability inside Ukraine. What are the chances that Poland will take advantage of this and make a move on Western Ukraine? What are the chances that there will be a new war in this region, a war between Russia, Belarus, and Poland? And what are the chances of that conflict bringing NATO in so that there is a decisive NATO-Russian conflict over Ukraine? What's your assessment? Is this fantasy, or does this have a possibility of happening? And if so, how much, what percentage would you attach to that?
The probability of Polish invasion to the Ukraine territory is very high in case of the military defeat of Ukraine. But in the NATO case, it's not so simple. We see that strategy of leading military actions in order to weaken Russia, like the war till the last Ukraine, and then they will use Poland. Again, I will stress that military activities of Polish troops in Ukraine is not subject to the Article 5 of NATO Charter. NATO will not have to protect Poland with all its forces. So Poland will be pumped up even stronger than they do it for Ukraine now. And well, now, despite military claims that the victory of Ukraine is inevitable, only 50-50 they believe in this, because they already built up the second line of their defense. Poland, Baltics, by the way, Romania. It wouldn't be done if they believed 100% in the Ukrainian victory. They don't believe in this victory. As for the annexation, I think it's going to be done differently. Poland doesn't need part of Ukraine. Poland needs the whole Ukraine. I mean, what will be left from Ukraine? Poland needs this. They will not tear off some pieces. No, it's rather for Hungary. For Hungary, it would be okay to set up a Transcarpathia autonomous region with close close ties to Budapest, and it's not covered. They openly speak about it and convey this policy. They provide passports and so on. So Budapest has another opinion about this conflict. But let's imagine now in Poland, there's a high irritation against Ukrainian refugees. They see the threat of banderization, so-called banderization from the part of Ukrainian refugees. Next year in 2023, there will be the 80th anniversary of Volyn butchery. In 1943, the peak was in summer of that year, the most highest atrocities. In Ukraine, there are no regions with predominantly Polish population. If someone would mention annexation, let's take Galicia, Ivano-Frankivsk, Volsk, and Rovninsk. If those regions be attached to Poland, and the population is there really pro-banderists, and that's going to be a problem for Poland. That's going to be a mine for the future Polish statehood. And I'd like to remind that both countries have historical claims. For example, the city of Rzeszów, the center of supplies to Ukraine, is in Transcarpathia. These are former Ukrainian ethnical lands, and ethnic cleansing were done there, which changed the population there significantly. So some inclusion of Ukrainian lands in Poland, even on the basis of autonomous, will be counterproductive for Poland, and they understand that. Another thing is to turn what is left from the Ukraine to a protectorate of Poland. This is one of the part of geopolitical concepts which is conveyed by Polish officials, starting from Pilsudski Union, so-called land between cities concept, a protectorate from Baltics to the Black Sea. Georgia, for example, was also included in this concept, organizing such protected lands under the umbrella of Poland. This option is quite possible with the broad participation of Polish troops.
Well, thank you very much. I have to say this has been one of the most enlightening discussions that I've had. It's a topic that is often touched upon in the West, but never with this kind of detail. So I want to thank you, Mr. Gigan, Vadim Gigan. Thank you for coming on. I wish you the very best in the new year, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk again sometime next year as developments proceed. And that's it for me. This is the final broadcast of the year. I want to wish anybody watching a very Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. And looking forward to New Year. Remember, knowledge is power. Have a great day.